Yes, and I forgot to chat, but if, but I might not be looking there. So if you can, always, if there are any questions, just interrupt me. Anyway, do your corner introduction.
Yes, we are live on YouTube, I think. I'm waiting for the stream to, or I'm waiting to see the stream starting. It actually did start. Let's skip that. Welcome to SQL Friday, number 132 with Erland Sommarskog. Don't let your permissions be hijacked. So Erland is back. I think it's the fourth time you're on SQL Friday, something like
I'm
that.
fifth or sixth. I've lost count.
You're very welcome anyway. And I'm gonna switch the scenes in the YouTube stream, which I see is on right now, so that we can see your shared screen. And I don't think you need an introduction, but if I'm gonna try, I mean, the one thing to say is that you're the longest standing MVP from Sweden, all categories, right? Or is there anyone in?
Yeah, I don't know about all categories, but for data platform,
Yeah,
yes.
so you have been an MVP for a while. Let's say that. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about how not to get your permissions hijacked. So, with that said, stage is yours, Erland.
Okay, so well, let's get started. And welcome to this session entitled "Don't Let Your Permissions Be Hijacked." And although Magnus did an introduction, I do have a bio slide. Yes, I live in Stockholm where I work as independent consultant. And yes, I've been in the P for many years. The way to get in touch with me is by old-fashioned email at sql@sommersgo.sc. And this session, it might be sort of, oh, I never thought of this. Oh, wait, what is it talking about? That is complete nonsense. But that couldn't happen. Well, so if you have any thoughts, ideas, that comes to you afterwards, I'm more than interested to hear from you. So please feel free to drop me a line. I also maintain a website, sysadmin.se, which you can see as a small collection of longer articles. And one of the actually shorter articles, Don't Let Your Permissions Be Hijacked. I put this one up, I think, about 3 years ago. But I also decided to make it a session to create awareness about what I think is a security threat that not a whole lot of people might have been thinking about. And slides and scripts are also available on our website, sommersgo.se/priest. So they just download here and you can see all the sessions I've made, and this one is right now on the top. So what is this whole thing about? Permission hijacking. Well, if you go Googling about the term, well, you will find a couple of hits, including quite a few of these are actually from my article. It's not a particularly commonly used term, although I've seen a few more of these, but it's actually a term I coined myself. But what it is about, so you have a user with less permissions than you have, but some permissions. That makes you unknowingly run code that uses, or rather abuses, your permissions to perform actions you absolutely would not agree to run to if you knew that you were running them, but they are to some advantage for the attacker. And you might think, how could that happen? Well, we're going to look at that in a few slides. But before that, I like to sort of set your mindset straight because no, wait a minute, this is just, no, that is not going to happen. It's just too fantastic. Please, when it comes to security, there is no such thing as too unlikely. If an attack can be performed, it will be attempted sooner or later in some place. And you don't want that place to be your workplace. All about the stakes. What can the attacker gain from the attack? Well, it can be a matter of advantageous updates. The classical example is sneaking into the employees table and double your salary. But it could also be stealing data to sell on the darknet, sell to a competitor, or use when you're starting up your own business. Or it could be that the attacker is in collusion with some ransomware, with some Bitcoin mafia, and install ransomware on your server estate through this attack. Or it could just be someone who want to cause a mess. Fred's know that he's going to get the sack any day now, and he's completely pissed with the company, so he's going to leave you present. And Fred doesn't even care if he gets discovered because, well, they actually report him to the police, so the whole thing comes out to the press. Now, the company wouldn't do that. Another thing I like to point out is that not all sites are equal. In some places, things are quite simple. There are sysadmin and there are plain users that can run the procedures and select data from tables, etc. And there is nothing in between. Now, those places are not very susceptible to these attacks that I will discuss, but see below as it says in the parents. On the other hand, in other places, it might be a lot more sophisticated. There is someone who's sysadmin. There is someone who is, well, a DB owner, application admin in the database. There could be developers who have rights to create procedures or who are members of DB/DDL admin, etc. So here you have, quite more likely, you have sort of locked down the permissions a little bit. You don't make everyone sysadmin. Now, but this is also the places where you need to watch out. This is where things could happen. But don't overlook application logins, because it's far too common that application runs with elevated permissions. And it's also far too common that an application have SQL injection holes. So this means that if there are, because most of these attacks will be attempted from the inside, but an application with SQL injection hole and an application that runs with too high permissions could permit an outside attacker to perform these games as well. And what does whose code gets deployed on the server? I will come back to what's at the end. Okay, so let's now have a look at a permission hijacking attack, the DDL trigger. So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a database called app2b, SA the owner of app2b. I don't think that is very good practice for reasons that are really outside the scope of this session, but it makes it slightly more interesting to have SA as owner, so I'm going to do that for this demo. And then I'm going to create a login here for Debbie owner. And Debbie owner, she's going to be, well, in app2b. She's the application lead or whatever, the developer lead or whatever. Let's see here. I think I need to get some light on my keyboard. Okay. So I know what I'm going to do. I could, of course, have logged in as Debbie owner in a separate window, but because I'm lazy or I want to make the demo run more smoothly, I'm going to impersonate Debbie owner. So I will be Debbie owner until I run this command. So I do execute as login, and I will be Debbie owner until I run this command revert. And Debbie, she's doing some normal work. She's creating a table and adding some data to it. Okay, so night falls, and it's my duty as sysadmin to run database maintenance. So I'm going to run check2b. I'm going to run back up to the database, and I'm going to rebuild the index of that single table. I'm not going to update the statistics, because once I've rebuilt the index, the statistics are also updated. Before we see who are the members of sysadmin, well, there are the usual suspects. There are SA, there is me, and there are these 3 service accounts. Now let's see what Debbie's up to today. She's going to create a trigger, an evil DDL tree on database for DDL database level events. That means any DDL that runs in the database. Okay, and she checks if the current user is a member of sysadmin, exec use master, alter server role, sysadmin, add member Debbie owner. Now that's kind of rude, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, she's creating that trigger. And again, night falls, and I'm going to run my database maintenance. And I'm first going to do DBC's check2b and back up the database. And so far, nothing has happened, nothing has changed. But now I'm going to do the index rebuild. And Debbie is taking over the server, because the index rebuild fires the DDL trigger, and that's how Debbie's hijacking my permissions. She knows that this maintenance job runs every night, so you just wait for something to happen. And because it runs every night, also she can fine-tune it for every night to do what you want to do. Okay, let's take her out of sysadmin. And she's out, but let's also run that update statistics command just to show you that that too fires the DDL trigger, and another way to hijack my permission. Okay, let's remove her again. But let's then think about what can we do to protect ourselves against this attack. Well, the problem is really this. We're having too much permissions. There is a very good thing called POP, Principle of Least Privilege. Means we never use more permissions than you really need. And once we might need the system permissions to get into the database. But once we are in the database, we don't need to be sysadmin to rebuild indexes and do all these operations. All we need to be is DB owner. So what if we could just throw our sysadmin permissions out the window, or rather put it in a little sack, and hang it on a stick outside the window, but just get rid of them for the moment. Turns out that is very easy to do in SQL Server. So I'm going to do this command. I'm going to say execute as user equals DBO. Run my command. And then you might think, wait a minute, DBO, that's SA, a sysadmin. That's going to, what's the difference? That is not going to work out, is it? Or it did. I was able to rebuild the index and update the statistics, but Debbie could not hijack my permissions. Why? Well, to understand this a little more, we need to look at these two DMVs, sysuser token and syslogin token. These two DMVs gives you the security token on database level and on server level. And on database level, I got one single token, but that is DBO, which is all might in the database, and that's enough. And it says grant or deny, which means it's good for both grant and deny. On server level, I got quite a few tokens because I'm logged in with Windows Authentication. And that means I also get a bunch of Windows groups here. And you can see that I also get the server roles, public and sysadmin. And most of these says grant and deny, but these two actually only says deny only. So if I could deny something to built-in administrators and I would have a problem. Well, probably not because I'm sysadmin, which means that there are no permission checks being done at all. Anyway, so what happens now? Right. What happens now when I do execute as user equals DBO? Things changes. So here I also get public and DBO, but it doesn't really matter. I'm still DBO. But down here, now I'm only SA, public and sysadmin. Okay, still sysadmin, but look here, deny only. So it's only good for deny. In practice, all my server level information has just vanished. They're gone away. And why is this design? Well, previously I did execute as a login. That means I impersonated Debbie on server level. But now I do impersonation on a database level. I impersonate a database user. And when you do that, all your server level permissions are gone away. Because when it comes to impersonation, there's a very important principle. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That is, if you do impersonation in one scope, is not, or in one context, it is not valid outside that context. Because let's say worse, then Debbie could do execute as user equals DBO. She would be SA, and well, she wouldn't need to do this thing with the trigger. That would be more strict. That's why we have this restriction. Now you might think, well, hey, Debbie, couldn't she do this, just put in a revert into the trigger? Because that would then revert the effect of execute as user equals DBO, and this would strike again. Well, Debbie's going to test that, because she's an evil woman, apparently. You can tell that from the trigger. And let's see if that plot worked out. No, it did not, because revert only reverts or counteracts an impersonation that has been done in the same scope. So if there had been an execute as inside the DDL trigger, revert would have acted against that one. But it has not acted on that one in an outer scope. That's a very important piece of this protection. Before I leave this demo, I want to get rid of that trigger. And let's go back to the slides. So, when running index and statistics maintenance, an application admin could install the DDL trigger, hijacked sysadmin permissions to do evil things. And adding a user to sysadmin is just one example. Maybe not the best way of doing an attack, because let's say the next day there is an and okay, who are the members of sysadmin? And then Debbie would be in quite a bit of a problem if this comes out. But she could maybe install a lower level user which can elevate the sysadmin by some trick, or just steal data or manipulate data. There's just lots of things you could do, but adding yourself to the system is just very apparent. And the line of defense is based on this, the POP, principle of least privilege. This is nothing I have made up myself, this term. No, there is actually a Wikipedia article about it. I also recommend this blog post from Andreas Walter. Andreas is a security program manager on the SQL Server team. And in this case, we applied this by doing execute as user equal DBO, because this way we renounced ourselves of all our server level permissions. Now, while we have learned the defense, there is a hiccup you can run into that you need to be aware of. So we're going to have a look at that. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to restore a database that comes from another server. And now we'll move that database and try to impersonate DBO. But I run into snag. Cannot execute as a database principal, because the principal DBO does not exist, or this type of principal cannot be impersonated, or you do not have permission. Do not have permission. I'm for crying out loud. I'm sysadmin. Well, the reason for this is because there is a problem with the DBO user. So in the database owner is recorded in two places, in sys databases, in ownership, and in sys database principals as the. Look here now what happens when I run this, and look at the result. See, they are not the same. And the reason for this is when you restore a database, well, if the database does not exist on the server, the user who runs the restore will be the owner. If the database already exists with that name, well, the owner will be retained. But in none of the cases, it only rewrites sys databases. It does not rewrite the DBO and sys database principles. So you get this mismatch, and that's when you get this error. And this is not the only situation where you might get it. Well, the situation where you get it are always related to impersonation, but it can sneak up into several places, for instance, when trying to install diagrams or using service broker, etc. So therefore, it's always a very good idea when you restore a database, always set the owner explicitly. And because also, maybe the owner should not be the one who's running the command. Maybe it should be someone else. And while I'm at it, I'd like to introduce what I think is best practice for database ownership. That is, each database should be owned by an SQL login that exists solely to own that database and have no other permissions. And again, for why, yeah, it's a bit outside the scope of this session, but I just think that this is the best way to do it. I know it's very common to have S8 ownable databases, but it's not the best thing, really. So I'm going to do this, and because I don't even want to know the password, I'm going to give it the GUID, random to C, and I'm also going to disable this login. And I'm calling it another DB dollar owner. The dollar doesn't mean anything. It's just an identifier character, just like A or X, whatever else. But it's just a way that you can see that, okay, this is the owner of that database. And now when I do the impersonation, yeah, it works out. So this slide just repeats what I said in the demo, so I will move on. Now I'll talk about running database maintenance in more general terms, because normally you wouldn't write your own maintenance scripts. Now you would use one of the standard solutions that are out there. And one which is very popular is Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution. And if you're running his solution, you're in a very good position because Index Optimize accepts the parameter at execute as user, which you can set to DBO or any other user of your choice. So he has it all set up for you. He has all solution and protection against this threat when it comes to database maintenance. Now, some people also stick with the maintenance plans in Management Studio. Bad news, there is no provision, there's no way to sneak in and execute as user because no one there thought about that this could be a threat. So if you insist of using these maintenance plans, what would you do? Well, one solution is you only do backup in database CC, and then you tell the database, the DB owners and the developers, well, you have to run index and statistics maintenance yourself, run it to task schedule, whatever, but I'm only going to do database backup or DBCC. Or if you want to do index and statistics maintenance, well, you can still do it, but then you would need to have one task per database. And each task would have its own login, that is DB owner, that database. And if you set up database ownership, as I suggested in the previous slide, well, then you have that owner, you could use that one. Of course, then you cannot not have it disabled it from login, you have to make a few changes, but you could use that one. Now, let's talk about DDL in general. So far, we talked about index and statistics maintenance, but of course, any DDL that you use system and run in a database where there are users with elevated but not system permissions could be dangerous. That it could be creating indexes, creating users, granting permissions, etc., etc. So therefore, you need to bracket all DDL with execute as user equals DBO when there is someone who can perform this attack. A corollary of this is no, you can't use that in UI Management Studio. You need to use the SQL commands. Now, this is a virtual session, but I can still see some faces going grey behind the screen. Wait, okay, you can still use the UI as long as you stay away from that OK button down there. Never press that one. But you can do your point and clicking if you like that, and then use this script button to script up this to win bracket that in execute as user equals DBO. Now, so far we talked about attacks against sysadmin, but sysadmin is not the only one who's under threat. So Debbie, she's going to get an assistant. She's going to get an assistant called DevDave. And he's going to help with, well, developing the application. So he's going to create tables, write the procedures, but it's going to do nothing with security, certificates of use, and all that. He's only going to write code. But so we're adding him to the database, and we're going to add him to the row, dbddl, and we're going to give him rights to run all the procedures, and we also give him full rights directly on the tables. Now, some people here might think that I wouldn't do that. I would only grant him select on the tables, but I don't want him to insert, update, or delete data. Well, once you have done this, you have given me a right to do this, because he can write this to procedure that performs an insert, update, or delete, and then run it through database ownership, so you can do that. So you could just as well grant this explicitly. Let's see, I did run this. Yes, I did. Okay, let's see what DevDave is going to up to. So I'm going to impersonate him, and he's creating, well, once the procedure that's going to work with that single table. Nothing strange there. Now let's see who are members of DB owner. Well, there is DBO, there is DB owner, and also the role DB owner is a member of DB owner. Well, okay. Well, let's see, what is DevDave up to now? Let's see what it's going to do. Execute as login. Oh, great. Dave's DDL tree. A DDL trigger. So he can do that, but he's going to work only with the application. Okay. For DDL database level events. Okay, for any DDL that runs in the database. And it's checking if the current user is a member of sysadmin. Yes, he is evil as Debbie. He wants to be sysadmin. He's going to try to hijack my permissions. But I'm too smart for that, you know that, so that is not going to happen. But then he's checking if the current user is a member of DB owner. And in that case, he's going to add himself to DB owner, because at least if he can't be sysadmin, at least he wants to be just as cool as Debbie and take over the database and do everything in the database. So Debbie is going to do some more work. She creates a new table, and she's happy with that. But look, DevDave is now taking over the database and can do anything in the database that Debbie can do. Oh, well, how can Debbie protect herself against this? Well, this is a kind of a special case that I already suggested. Should Dave really be able to work with DDL triggers? I don't think so. The idea is, well, for developers, they're going to write the procedures, they're going to create triggers, views, etc. But DDL trigger is not part of the application. I find that very, very difficult to grasp. That's a very strange concept to me. So, I mean, of course, it makes perfect sense for Debbie to install the DDL trigger to track what Dave is doing. But Dave has no business there. So we're going to play Debbie, and first of all, she's going to review. Okay, we have a DDL trigger and we don't want. So she's going to drop that trigger. And then she's taking Dave out of deboner. Yep, done. And then she's taking him out of dbddl. She's going to create a new role called our DDL. And she's making this role a member of dbddl. And now comes the very important command. Deny, alter any database DDL trigger to our DDL. So this role can do anything that dbddl can do, except for dealing with DDL triggers. This is very, very important. If you like using this role dbddl, don't do that. Create this new role and then deny it this permission. Then she's making DevDave a member of our DDL. And she's making a final check that, yes, DevDave is not a DB owner. And I'm going to be back to be myself. And instead, I'm going to play DevDave. So it's going to create a new table, create a user procedure, just like expected, just like we want him to do. But then it tries to recreate that DDL trigger. And oops, that worked out. That was not supposed to happen. Let's see,
Oops.
Oh, yes, of course. Let's see here. Let's see here. I didn't. Maybe I just talked about this command, but I forgot to run it. That must be the case. Okay. And of course, now he is. Yes, he's a member of DB. Okay. Let's see. We need to clean up. Okay, and he's still a member of. He should not be a member of DB owner. Because you have the DDL trigger, we need to get rid of it, of course. Sorry about that, folks. Oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? We have no triggers. We should be able to do this unless we have. And we take him out here. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. It usually works, but let's see. I've messed things up a little bit here. We don't have the trigger left. Yeah, and I did. I hope. Yeah, we don't have any DL triggers in the database. No. And we make it, take him out of DB owner. Somehow he's still there. That's a little mysterious.
Spooky.
Yeah. Because, of course, since he's a member of DB owner, of course, he can create DDL triggers. But believe me, this usually works. Okay, well, then again, those are things when you do this, believe me, this usually works. And but of course, now if I were going to play him, he's going to be able to create the DDL trigger because, yeah, well, he got an error for those two, but he could recreate the DDL trigger because he was a member of DB owner, and for some reason, I'm not able to take him out. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to move on. So, just to repeat, a user who's a member of DDL admin, they have the rights to create DDL trigger, and they could hijack who's someone who's a DB owner to become DB owner or do something else in the database they don't have permission to directly. But as I said, this role should not have the rights to create DDL triggers. I think it's a misdesign from Microsoft. So take all users out from DDL admin and create a new role for our DDL admin, or ask for an AD group and maintain it that way. And add your developers to this role. And our DDL admin or this AD role group alter in the database DDL trigger. And believe me, it usually works. If you run the demo normal ways, still kind of intrigued. How come we can't get rid of dev? Anyway, and also you may ask, why do we have this roundabout way? Why not simply deny DDL admin directly? And the answer is SQL Server does not do that. So that's why we have to create this new role or AD group. Now, before I move on, I'd like to discuss these few more things like execute answer and a few more other things we're going to come back to in the session. So execute as user, when you do this, you're running commands as a database user, which means that you cannot access other databases. Well, you can access temp-db and master because they have the guest user enabled, but generally you are locked out from everything else. You're sandboxed into the current database. And to do this, you need to have impersonate permission on the user. And of course, if you are DB owner, you have that permission. Execute as login, which means you're running commands as a server login. There is no sandboxing inside SQL Server. You can go anywhere you want inside the server. And you need impersonate permission on the login, which is a server level permission. And of course, if you are sysadmin, you have that permission. Now, both of these are great for testing permissions. So let's say you're setting up a database role that, well, you wanted that role to be able to do this and this and this, but not that and that and that. Well, create a user without login, add it to the role, and do impersonation, try the things out and see if it works as intended. You don't, because you don't have an extra login, etc. So it makes it very, very convenient to test permissions. And in this particular context, execute as user is good for removing all our server level permissions. The revert command, as I said, well, the impersonation is enforced until the revert command is executed in the same scope. So if we do execute as user, then call us the procedure that does revert, it does It's not going to work out. If you do impersonation inside of the procedure, well, there is no revert. There is still an implicit revert when you leave the procedure. And also, revert must be executed from the same databases where you started the impersonation. So if you are in database A and you get a login, you move to database B and then do revert, you will get an error. You must be back in the same database. So nothing interesting happens when you do the revert. And here's the tip. You should always put revert in a batch of its own. There is no syntactic requirement for this, but if you have revert in the same batch as the command you're running, and that batch errors out, well, the batch may be aborted and revert command may not be executed. And then you're still mentally thinking that you are back to yourself, but whoa, what is going on here? You get very confused. I know this because I've done this more than once. So this is a tip from hard experience. If you run too many reverts, that is no problem. You will never get an error because you're running one revert too many. Also, there are some variations on how you can do this, which I'm going to mention one. You can say execute as with a no revert to disallow revert to be executed. And for example, when you're running a script you cannot trust, and I will come back to this towards the end of the session. Linked servers is something when we're playing this impersonation game can cause some problems. I like to bring. If you run execute as user, you cannot access linked servers at all because they are server objects, so you are completely locked out from them. And when you're setting up a linked service, there are two choices for authentication. You can have self-mapping. That means that users log on to the remote server with their own credentials, which is best for security. But you can also set up login mapping. So the login will be with the username and password pre-stored in SQL Server. And if that the linked server is another SQL Server instance, those must be SQL logins. And sometimes you have to do that. They are quite laborious because either you do the mapping per user or for everyone. And if you do it for everyone, that is apparently not very secure, because anyone who comes into the server can use that linked server, because the linked server itself is not a securable, which you grant permissions on. Now, if you do execute as login, self-mapping is not going to work out. Again, because what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The impersonation is valid inside the local SQL Server instance, valid in Windows, is not valid on the remote instance. And this can cause us some problems, and we'll come back to this. So far we have talked about DDL, but DDL is not the only thing that can result in problems. Maybe let's say we're going to do some data maintenance. We're running insert, update, delete, and tables, either through SQL statements or I'm about to say, God forbid, through the UI. Well, again, there might be a trigger all of a sudden on the table that goes and hijacks your permission to do something evil. Or you're running a procedure that's part of application or something like that. And on the fourth nesting level down there, the developer had hidden some malicious code to do evil things. Now, if it's only a matter of protecting sysadmin, because there is no one between the DBO and plain users, well, it's the same as before. You just go and impersonate DBO when you're going to do these things inside the database. You should, because if you're only going to update data in a table, well, you don't need to be sysadmin. You need to be sysadmin to get into the database, but once you're there, you can impersonate DBO. But it could be, of course, that the operation requires you, because for example, you're going to copy from one database to another. Well, then what you can do is that you can take that database data into temp tables before you start the impersonation, because you can still access temp tables when you are impersonating a database user. But how to protect DBO in this scenario? So let's say now she has this problem with DevDave, and we have to go back again to POP, the principle of least privilege. If Debbie is going to do database maintenance, she's going to insert data and so on. She's going to run procedures. Do she need all her DB owner powers to do this? No, she does not. So what she should do is to create a sandbox user without login. Yes, you can do this. You can. I mentioned this before, but you can say this: create user, sandbox user without login. This is a great feature, not the least in this context, because Debbie does not have the permission to create logins. But as I mentioned, for example, if you want to test user just inside the database momentarily, you can do this. And well, she will give this sandbox user some reasonable set of permissions. For instance, rights to run all the procedures and full permissions on all tables. And then say execute as user equals sandbox user. And now DevDave can't do any permission hijacking in the DML triggers or install procedures. Now, let's discuss a little more exactly what permissions that sandbox user need. And in many cases, the example I had on the previous slide, permissions to run all the procedures and full rights on all tables, that should be enough. We have to be a little bit pragmatic. And that's particularly, it's sufficient with someone like DevDave, because DevDave already has these permissions. So why would it? Yeah. But let's say that in this database, we also have Betty Business Analyst, who has her own schema where she can create tables and deal things, but she's only supposed to work in that schema. And maybe she has select permissions on the other tables. But then she tells us, well, I messed up my data. Could you help me with this? It turns out that Betty might be more smarter than you think, so she might have planted something in the triggers on her table. So in that case, Debbie would need a sandbox user with only permissions to Betty's schema. So there is no permission hijacking. She needs to mimic the permissions of Betty. Oh, she could also, of course, impersonate Betty directly. Now, we might run into problems though when we're playing these games. We do execute as user, we are sandboxed into the current database. So our stored procedures may actually have access to other databases, picking up data from, well, other databases. Or I said that we could get data into temp tables beforehand, but let's say that those tables are very big and we only need a few rows, but we don't really know exactly which rows because we have to join and so on. So getting those data into temp tables is not really, it's a bit unpractical. Well, in this case, we need a sandbox, a login that we can impersonate with execute as a login. Or if we prefer, since it's a login, log in a separate query window. And this is easy to do for sysadmin who has the powers to do this. But Debbie, she would have to ask the DBA to create this login for her and get the impersonate rights on that login, so she can cut down her permissions. But the operation could be even more complicated. What if there is access to linked servers? Again, that's quite common. And that could either be directly or through stored procedures. Well, if that linked server is set up with login mapping, impersonating a sandbox login is still going to work out. But if it's set up with self-mapping, it starts to get complicated because this case impersonation is not good. So either we can do what we can do is set up login mapping for that sandbox user only, or that sandbox login only. However, this requires that the remote server must be enabled for SQL authentication, and that might not be the case, and that may have to be restarted. So that could be quite a bit of a hurdle. The other alternative is to go talk with the AV folks and say, oh, I need a sandbox Windows user that I can use a sandbox login. And then you would start SMS with the runners command to do this. So yes, at this point, it starts to get a little unpractical. But if it comes to security, yeah, security is always a hassle. But it's even more hassle when you did not employ security features, but you were attacked and bad things happened. That's a really hassle. Ask THEvery, for example. They know all about that. That's a big IT company who was subject to a quite big ransomware attack, which affected many of the clients as well. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to change the theme a little bit. We're going to talk about application users and what permissions they should have. So an application may log in users with integrated security, or the application may have its own login and password. No matter what, ideally, these application users, or logins, should only have permissions to run stored procedures. That's all they should have. But we all know that there are lots of applications out there that does not use stored procedures, or at least does not use stored procedures uniquely. So it might very well submit direct SQL statements, and we have no choice but granting them select or even insert, update, and delete permissions. But I say this is where it stops. You should never agree to more permissions. Application users should never have more permissions. And the reason for this is SQL injection. Because if you have an application, well, there is an SQL injection now. Just too sad, but it's far too common. Far too common. And even with these permissions, let's say, if there is an SQL injection, this could permit a user to delete or update data in the table where the user has no business. But at least the damage is confined to this specific database. It does not go to the rest of the server, the rest of your server estate, which you might be able to do if you have too many permissions granted to the application login. And by the way, if you have these application logins set up this way, well, they can serve very well as sandbox users. But what if the application actually needs to perform actions beyond the execute or read write on tables? So let's take a simple example. maybe not like one you would do in practice, but at least in a simple example. We want to show a count of the number of users connected to the database. To do this, you need to query the view sysdmxx sessions. But if you don't have the permission to view server state or view server performance state, you only see your own session. So how to deal with this? Well, what if we, rather than granting the permissions to the user, could grant it to the stored procedure that is running the code, so we have full permission of how the permission is used? What if we could do that? And yes, we can. And I talked about this in an SQL Friday. I don't remember exactly when. Magnus might recall, but maybe 2 years ago. So the technique is this: you sign the procedure with a certificate, and from this certificate you create a user or a login, depending on whether it's a database or server level permission, and you grant that login the required permission. Now that is quite a bit of a mouthful, and I could talk a whole lot about this. As I said, I have a presentation about this, and there's also an article on my website about this, packaging permissions in stored procedure. It's quite a long article, and the reason it's long is because I do not only explain the mechanics, I also present how the technique works and why it works in quite a bit of detail. Because I'm thinking, my opinion is this: if you're using an advanced security feature without understanding how it works, that is not secure, because then you might be using it in the wrong way. So in this article, there is a procedure and a script to automate the process. And there's also recording on YouTube. I don't think this is from SQL Friday. Well, the SQL Friday recording is also out there, but I think this link itself goes to another session, presentation, another time I run this session. Now, here I'm not going to talk about the details, how you do this. I'm only going to talk about some key facts that it makes to explain why this technique is so fantastic. So when you change a signed procedure, well, the signature and therefore the permissions go away. So it must be signed again. So let's say this: Debbie, she wants this procedure that shows the user account. So she writes this, she comes to you as a DBO, or you come to you as a sysadmin, sorry, and yeah, you look at this is good. Well, you arrange for this, you sign the procedure, you grant the permissions to create the user login, etc. And the user login you only have to create once. You have to reapply. Well, actually, as a matter of fact, you always do everything, because this script drops and everything and removes everything. But so you will actually do all of this in one go using the scripts that I mentioned previously. Anyway, let's say Debbie now goes back to her desk and thinks, now wait a minute, I want this procedure to do this as well. But she finds now that, oh, the permissions are gone. So she comes back to you, and this time you say, no, Debbie, please, no, don't even think about that. That's absolutely not acceptable. Go back and change to the original version. I will reapply the signing, but I'm not going to agree to this. So that is, you are in full control of what they're doing in this code. You're full control. That's a great thing. Also, particularly in this theme of permission hijacking, here's something very, very interesting. So if you package these permissions, they also apply any dynamic SQL invoked by the same procedure. And this means that if you have a stored procedure that is running dynamic SQL, you don't have to grant select permissions to the user. Instead, you can package the select permissions with a procedure. Would you for some reason call a system procedure? Well, they will also apply inside that procedure. But if you are entering user-written code, that is a sub-procedure, you fire a trigger or a function. No, the permissions are gone. So these would also have to be assigned if the permissions would apply there. But the interesting part is this: what you see is what you sign. So they can't hijack you. Oh yeah, they're going to do all this, I'm going to sign this. And they're thinking then, okay, in this trigger we're going to do evil stuff. Long nose, no, it's not going to work out, because the permissions do not apply inside the trigger. Although the one thing you have to watch out for is dynamic SQL, because quite likely the dynamic SQL might be formed from, let's say, input parameters, data in a table, or even a table name. That could be used for evil stuff, so watch out. Maybe you might want to say that, no, wait a minute, that is dynamic SQL. I don't understand what this code is doing. No. Okay, let's move over and talk about agent jobs. So Deb comes over to you and says, Mr. DBA, but we need to run a purge job in our database to get rid of data. Can you create an agent job that runs this procedure like 2 o'clock in the morning? And what Deb might be hoping for is that you want to be an autopilot and create that job running a sysadmin. And you can see Debbie and Dave now in high five in the corner. Yeah, we got him. Because, of course, now they can do all sorts of changes to that procedure that is going to run a sysadmin. But, of course, you are a lot smarter than that. You lean over to Debbie and say, now, I got a better idea. Why don't you run that in task scheduler on the application server? Because, I mean, between you and me, agents is for management tasks. It's not for application jobs, is it? Okay, we may not win that battle, but at least we could try. But in my opinion, yes, agent is for management tasks. It's not really for application jobs. But yeah, before we move on to look at alternatives, I'd like to establish some principles about agents. First of all, job owners should not be persons who can leave the company. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Also, I would say this: avoid adding users to MSDB. MSDB is a creepy place. You give someone the little finger, they got a whole hand, read more into it. So keep them out. From this follows that setting up an agent job is always a sysadmin task. The contents of the job, that's a developer task. But setting up the job, will always be on sysadmin. And application jobs and agents, well, they should execute with the same permissions as application users. Of course, since it's part of the application, they should not have any elevated permissions. Well, if they need to do tasks that requires high permissions, well, use assignment procedures. Let's say, for instance, that the database have a petition table. At the end of the month, you need to create a new petition. Well, that's a procedure, that's a job, that's part of the application. Run, grant, and package the permissions needed to do that. Now, what alternatives do we have for Dave's first job? And alternative 2. Alternative 1 was run it on task scheduler. Keep it outside auto agent. Well, we can set the user on the job step, run this user app login. So it's a limited user. And in this case, agent will impersonate the user as execute as user. So this means we are sandboxed into the database. There's no possibility to do cross-database access or lane service. But if it's only a purge job, that should not be a problem. If they're actually archiving to another database, it's not going to work out. Now, important, when you do this, the job must be owned by a sysadmin. If it's not, the setting is just flatly, completely ignored. Next alternative is to set the job owner. You do that on the front page of the job. And, well, it would be an SQL login or Windows login with application permissions. And again, if there is an app login already because that's the way the application is logging in, well, use this one here as well. In this case, agent will impersonate the owner with execute as a login, which means there's no restriction for cross-database access or server access, so that archiving job is going to work out unless it's going to do over a linked service with self-mapping, because that is not going to work out. Because, as I said before, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And there is a nasty side effect of this. The job owner will be added as a user to MSDB and also a member of SQL agent user role, but not if it happens next time you install a cumulative update or a GTL, because they run a script that does this. So please don't ask why. And yes, they still do this. Well, at least they did it with CU1 for SQL 2022, and they've been doing this for so many years. I don't think they've stopped. Please don't ask why. And the last alternative is the most complicated one. It makes more steps, but it's also the best one in my opinion. There's no impersonation because in this case, agent will perform a real login into Windows. So there are no restrictions with linked service. You have all degrees of freedom. And as I said, it's the most complicated, but it's also the most general. So first of all, you need to get an AD account. You have to talk with AD people and say, okay, we need this service account that's going to do this and this and this. And then you will create a login for that AD account. And if there are linked service involved, well, you have to create, of course, that on all the instances. And in the database, well, you grant the database user, you create the grant application permissions. For instance, if you already have an application users row, well, you will add it to that row. And then comes a special step. You create a credential. So you run this command, create credential with a name and with identity, which is the name of the Windows login you got, and the secret, which is the password. And while this one could be, well, Gretchen, or this one could be Luis, well, I would recommend that you have the same name for the credential and the Windows login. That makes things simpler. And then you create a proxy agent. When you open the agent node in proxy, when you open the node in agent, there are a couple of entries, jobs, alerts, and also proxies. And then you also have to select a subsystem. For instance, operating subsystem is the one we need a command exec. So then you use that credential from the previous step, and you also create the proxy name, and again, you could have different names here, but don't do that. Use the same name. And then you create a job with agent with sysadmin as owner, and then you create the job step. And you say that the type is command exec. And what is going to happen now, when you run this, you're going to say add use this proxy. So agent what's going to do is going to look up that proxy, find the name of credential, SQL Server, give me the Windows login and password for this credential, and log into Windows as that one. And then it's going to run this command, which always going to be SQL command. So it's completely new login into SQL Server. There's no impersonation tricks going on now. And the command, well, typically will be, you will have the -i option because by default, SQL command runs with the quote identifier off. So you need this one. High important because it tells SQL command to, if there is an error, to propagate this back to the command line. This is needed so that if the operation fails, agent understands that the job has failed, so he can report it as failed. Then -s is an agent token. This is a bit of mumbo jumbo. The point of this is that if you move the job to another server, another instance, you don't have to think about changing the server name. And finally, well, the name of the database and the command to run. Now, we have to think about this, that the developers or whoever who actually interested in this job, they need to know what something has gone wrong. But they are not users in NSDB, so they don't have access to agent history. Therefore, set up mail notifications, so if the job fails, well, they will get a mail. Or if they also want it on success, well, you can do that. And on the advanced page of the job step, you can define an output file. That requires that the job owner is sysadmin. If the job owner is not sysadmin, that is not going to work out. So that's another nail in the alternative. And then you would direct the output to a share with the application team as success. So the idea is, okay, you create the job, and once it has been created, it's just going to go on autopilot until, well, for instance, they want to change the schedule. But if the job fails because the procedure did something wrong, well, you're not involved. Now let's look at a few more of these hijacking attacks through deployment. So you get a deployment package from the application team. And when you think about it, it could include all sorts of nasty stuff. They could be adding extra logins or users with elevated permissions. They can manipulate data in the database on the server. Or what about this? They know that you are also sysadmin on the very, very sensitive server B. So they're setting up a linked server to that B and whoops, get some sensitive data. They don't have access to the server A where you're running this script, but they have access to the test system C. So they set up a linked server to that one as well in the script and whoop, dump the data. And they got it. Yes, sounds fantastic, but if the stakes are high enough. Now, how can you protect yourself against this sort of hijacking? Well, let's take the simple case. It's just a plain script, but it's very long and you can't review all that. It's going to do lots. But you can still do execute as user equals DBL, but you need to do this with no revert. So with no revert means that if there is a revert in that script, it will not have an effect. Instead, you will get an error message. And if that happens, it's time to really sound the alarm, because that's really, really mysterious. Now, keep in mind though, if you do this, if you say execute as user equals, basically giving the application team DBL rights in the database, because probably they're doing so many things in the database, there's no way you can figure that out. But if they're only going to work with code, that is tables, procedures, etc., you can, but they're not going to do ground with security users, etc. Well, rather you'll have a sandbox user that is member of our DD element, or whatever permissions you're prepared to grant them. So let's just vendor database, and where you can do stuff in a specific schema that is permitted by the application. Well, then the sandbox user would only have permission in that schema. And could also be that the script does things on server level that are legit, that you agree to. Well, then you can use a sandbox login, and of course, only have limited server level permissions. And I would recommend when you do this, that you first run this in QA, because you might ask the developer application team, well, okay, what permissions do I need? You need this and this and this. So then you run this and you find that, oh, no, I need this as well. And it's perfectly legit. It doesn't have to be malicious. They just forgot about it. But running in QA may not necessarily reveal the malicious actions, because they may check if the permissions are available. They may check that we are on the right server to do this stuff. But of course, there's also the thing you want the whole thing to succeed at all. Now, it could be that the deployment scripts have legit actions that requires very high permissions. So let's say, for example, this server is only one single database, and the application, okay, we need this, well, cost threshold for parallelism should be, well, 50 or whatever. So they want to put that in the script. Well, you could ask them, okay, these very high level things, I want these in a separate script so I can run these with sysadmin, but not right in the middle of the other things. But it could also be that you get the deployment in a DAC pack or a MSI install, and there's worst case, it could be a vendor package, and you have even not known options to control the login. So you have to run the sysadmin because, oh yeah, no, we don't have sysadmin permission, so we can run this, the vendor package says. Well, what can you do in this case? And I guess auditing is your only choice here. Now, trying to explain how you're going to set up that auditing, that's a session of its own, so that's absolutely not in scope for this session. But one thing I like to point out, though, that are several ways to do auditing, but SQL Server Audit is the only one that I know that audits that has been turned off. So you set up this server level audit because basically you're going to do it on server level. The database is probably a lost case because there will be so many things going on in that one. Server level, I mean, wait a minute, it was turned off. That's very, very suspicious. That's very suspicious. You might think, but DDL triggers is more convenient. DDL triggers, they can be turned off with disable trigger, and disable trigger does not fire DDL triggers, so don't even think about that option. Finally, attacks through applications. So you're using the time reporting system or some other local application, purchase order, whatever. But it turns out that the developer of that application, oh, that is Mr. DBA. Okay, wait a minute. Let's go into the HR data because he has connection to do that. Now, how can you protect yourself against this? I mean, you can't do execute as user because you're only running an application, maybe through a web browser or something on your desktop. But there is a possible defense, and I actually encountered this, and I worked my client had a bank as a customer, and at that bank, I logged in on the laptop with a normal Windows account, presumably to use mail and all that sort of stuff. Now, to access the sensitive SQL servers, I had a second login, which I used to log into a remote desktop. So that's the way to do it. And of course, that login is probably not good in the time reporting system. You wouldn't use it for that one. You would only use it for this secret stuff. And you can, of course, also ask that should really the application server for the time reporting system even have network access to the sensitive database servers? Again, this is something for the IT, not really a DBA thing, but really for the IT department in general to think about. Okay, we're getting towards the end, so I'd like to make a summary of what this has been about. So again, permission hijacking, malicious users with some elevated permissions, but not the same permissions as you have, can inject code that you unknowingly execute with your permissions, performing actions that you don't agree to. And elevated permission here includes access to the deployment pipeline. Contiguous integration, very popular. Oh, I check into something to Git, and 30 minutes later it is in production. Yes, great for agile systems, etc., etc. Maybe not the thing you should do in a very sensitive healthcare or defense system, or where things can go bad. And the summary, the means of protection is based on principle of least privilege, POP. Impersonate DB owner to get rid of your server level permissions. To protect DB owner from being hijacked, use sandbox plugins. Never put people directly in DDL admin, but create a role our DDL admin, which you deny the rights to do DDL triggers. And application users should have limited permissions, at most select, insert, update, delete on tables, preferably less. And application tasks and agent jobs should run with the same permissions as the application, never elevate permissions. And use procedure assigning when application users need to perform actions beyond the permission set. Because when you're using this technique, you can have full control of how the permission is employed. And keep this in mind, the application team may in practice be equal to DB owner, even if they don't have access to the server. Because all the code they're deploying is just spend your time to review that. Very few DBAs have that time. And yes, some final words. Yes, some of the attacks I have suggested may seem very contrived, very fantastic. But as I said in the beginning, If the stakes are high enough, a possible attack will be attempted sooner or later in some place. Now, I also mentioned in the beginning a couple of reasons why people would do these attacks. But there was one kind of attack I left out, and that is the benevolent attacker. The benevolent attacker is not someone who has a malicious intent, but just someone who wants to help the users to work around a corporate. I mentioned previously the application team sneaking in logins into in the deployment script. It could be that the application team is just completely sick and tired. Every time the users report an issue, they have to go and ask you to run an SQL script to get execution plans, etc. So they say, let's be done with this. We need to serve our users faster. So let's just put in these users. Probably not the right way they should do it. They should bring it up with their manager and so on and so on and so on and so on. But that is one reason also a kind of attack you can run into. So you decided, I mean, of course, you could have made these users sysadmin, but you decided to lock down their permissions. Certainly not a bad idea in itself. But if you decide to do this step, lock down permissions, no, you only need these permissions. Well, if you don't watch out, they might find a way to work around that restriction. Oh, well. So that was all I had to say for today. My name is Erland Sommarskog. My email address is sqlsommarskog.se. There is some stuff I see. Well, I think this is only an announcement in the chat. Anyway, slides and scripts are available on my website, sommarskog.se/present. And again, if you have any questions, comments on this session, feel free to drop me a line. Because I mean, I don't even work as a DBA myself. I work as a developer mainly, but so I might be on a ivory tower. I don't know. So if you think that this is completely wrong, or maybe you should bring up this as well, please let me know. Anyway, here's a link to the article itself. The article is not very long, but there are a couple of things still I did not bring up, like cross-database attacks that might be even more fantastic, but things that could happen. And also, if you run the few demos, there's a cleanup script that's going to just drop all the database and logins and users. So that was all I had to say for today.
Thank you, Erland. And let's see what we get in the chat. Well, I posted a video or a link to packaging permissions in stored procedures. It's from Group by, because the presentation you gave to SQL Friday, which was SQL Friday 110, that recording is gone somewhere. I don't know where. So, but luckily I found the Group by presentation, so it should be good.
Yeah. I think that presentation I had in the deck might also be from Group by. I don't remember. I do keep on my website. I do have a video section where because I don't record things myself, but when people have been nice to record things and put them on YouTube, I figured, okay, I can have a link to them somewhere. So I have a link on my website so people can find them.
Per says, thank you, Erland. It might be that this hour generated a lot of work for us, I guess he means. So. And I mean, if that's the case, then yeah, a lot of work is never fun, especially if it makes you stressed out. But if you can make your applications more secure, then yeah, by all means.
Security often means a lot of work, and because some things, yeah, but okay, yeah, we can do this, but it's just unpractical to do these executors use equals DBO and so on. And but we have to think about this, and particularly, yeah, it's great down to, because of course, if you make everyone, and it's far too common. Oh yeah, I need to do something on this server. Oh, okay, I'll put your system in. Okay, yes, that's great, but wait a minute, was that right? But also, you have to be careful.
I find it a bit hard with SQL Server because, I mean, some developers know enough for it to make sense to give them certain permissions, like looking into query store, looking into execution plans, etc., etc. But it's very hard to find like the right permissions, and there are some things that I would like to allow. For example, running a debugger, which you can't do if you're not sysadmin. So it's a lot of times it boils down to, okay, then you need sysadmin, and then you just got to find a way to give it out and make sure that it's okay. You need it half an hour to troubleshoot this thing, and then it will be removed. So it's not.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem is that out of convenience you just hand out sysadmin and then make it permanent. Or even worse,
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah,
know a
yeah.
SQL login that has very high permissions, and they share that login because they happen to know the password for it, and those things happen.
Yeah, yeah, that's also, I mean, that's far too common. So, I mean, I remember I was working with a system and for a client, and then they had customers, and well, so it was an ISV, so they had clients, and then oh yeah, but this they have a problem, but oh, but I don't have a login on that side. Yeah, but you can use my login and password. And I said no, but because of course, if you have been given a personal username and password, well, you have been given a username and password. You should not share it with anyone.
Yeah,
So I just like refused, even if that would have helped them, would have helped me to help the customer. So I could sit next to that person. Okay, you can run this command, but no, I'm not, because that would just be the wrong thing to do. But people, yeah, often do this. Well, you can use my login. Yeah, yeah, you can do this. Yeah, you can. But that's just not the way security should work. But yes, security is often not a hassle. And also in SQL Server, you often end up with sysadmin because, oh, I don't know if I need this. Oh, but first of all, you need to know which permissions do I really need for this, and oh, and just that's finding out that takes time because there are so many permissions. Okay, I give you sysadmin, and of course there is, and I mean, if you trust your colleagues or someone, you can do that, but that's great. But if, for example, this is more the thing, no, I did not trust my colleague enough to make the sysadmin. Okay, but then you also have to be aware of they could do evil things against
yeah.
you. So that's you.
I think it's I like the idea to have, and even for myself, I don't want my normal Windows account to have all the permissions on all the servers, because then, I mean, just look at the big ransomware attack that happened in Sweden, which still has effect for a lot of companies and cities and counties, and I mean, I guess the biggest problem there was that it wasn't isolated to one single customer. That attack could spread,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
you need to have those boundaries,
I've been,
basically.
yes, I don't. Oh, I've been thinking a lot about that. And there was an interview in one of the, well, the woman who's in charge of that particular operation in Sweden. And I was thinking, God, yeah, but we have enough good security. No, apparently not because you were hacked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna disappear out the camera so I can read the chat.
Okay.
Uh,
Don't make the developers your enemies. Well, probably true, but also don't say yes to everything either.
yeah, that's also. I mean, uh, yeah, the previous DBA had gone. Yeah, that's also one thing. Yeah, okay, you do a lockdown, but then it has so many effects. Okay, but things doesn't work, so the business goes crazy. And of course, the business is not going to care about security until bad things happen. And why didn't you do that previously? Yes. Yeah, and of course, I've always been used to working with sysadmin, and the system I work with now. Yes, I'm sysadmin on the production server because, well, they trust me and they don't really have a true DBA.
Hmm.
But and it might be the right thing to do, but I mean, and of course, there's also this thing that there's some people you might not want to make them sysadmin because wait a minute, they don't know enough because they could cause a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
But
think
but then you don't want them coming in through a back door and doing things on their own either.
the my first job when I was a developer and somehow became the DBA, I really should not have been trusted with sysadmin permissions. But on the other hand, no one else knew anything about it either, and someone had to set up the backup jobs and so on. It ended up with me
Yeah.
doing a lot of crazy things, like accidentally dropping the user table in production where I meant to do it in development, and then I learned how to do a point in time restore, which was good, but it was under a lot of stress.
Yes. And of course, also, I mean, it also depends very much on what kind of environment you have. My current client has made the most. I mean, of course, there are security concerns about because it's financial data, etc. But for the corporation, but let's say if you're in well, defense industry, healthcare, really have to watch out. I mean, basically, this is about being paranoid, but it could be in your job description. Yes, you are supposed to be
Yeah,
paranoid.
yeah, that's true. Um, yeah, I think the most regulated market I worked in was in like online gaming or betting, casino gaming and stuff like that, where I mean we were not allowed to log into to customer environments without getting a change request approved, and it had to go through. When it was in the US, in New Jersey, it had to be approved by the authorities in New Jersey as well. So then, I mean, if you
Yeah.
make a change, you better make it right, because if you make a mistakes, it could take a week before you get a change approved to fix your own mistakes. So, and I mean, it was somewhat cumbersome, but it also made us test things more thoroughly than we would have had otherwise.
Yeah.
Just oh, I'm sorry, my voice is cracking up. Here is an actual question. Would you recommend running SQL agent job with a managed service account? That is an account you can't use to log on interactively to mitigate the risks of perm hijacking.
So yes, well, agent is going to well, agent always run on a service account, and that will be a managed. Yeah, it's often a managed service account.
Mm.
But the permission hiding, since it happens inside SQL Server, um, I don't think it matters from that
No.
perspective. But again, the job should be running. So you should set up so the job is not running with, because if the job is, well, if this agent is running at this managed service account, agent will be sysadmin if it runs the job itself.
Mm.
If it's a transaction, it's called job step. But that's why you should use this, for example, this proxy user.
Yeah, and I think that's it isn't. It really isn't that hard to set up a proxy user for a job. So for that, there really isn't any excuse to not do it, I think,
Yeah,
because there are so few steps you need to perform to set up a proxy account, and then you.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, you need to talk with 80 people, but you have the matter of a routine. Where I'm right now, we've done this several times. Just we have because we had linked services things
Mm.
involved.
Cool. Let's see. Mark is writing again. Let's see if we have a follow up on that. I'm gonna stop the YouTube stream, by the way. So YouTube, bye for
Yeah.
now, and I'll post.